Okay, and we see that already happening with the bankruptcy of General Motors. Who are the investors in General Motors? Warren Buffett has already positioned himself, and there'll be more of that happening in the months and years ahead as this paper wealth, this tremendous concentration of financial wealth, is then used to acquire the real wealth, which is the control over resources, the control over manufacturing outlets, services outlets, and of course also what's happening is how these financial institutions ultimately control the U.S. government. Some people have said, and I think this is mistaken, that the crisis involves some form of nationalization of the banking sector. That is incorrect. What is happening is that the government is giving money to the banks under their program, the TARP, the Troubled Assets Program, okay, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, and in effect, they're giving this money to the banks, and then the banks are using this money, essentially it's liquid assets, they're using this money to buy out real economy companies in the rest of the economy, but at the same time what's happening is to find this massive transfer of public wealth from taxpayers' earnings to the banks. You need to increase dramatically the U.S. public debt, which currently stands at about $11 trillion. And so when you add up the bailouts under the Troubled Asset Relief Program and the various other bailouts, you're well in excess of $1 trillion. And where does the money come from? It can come from essentially two sources. Either you dramatically slash all categories of social expenditures. In other words, you're running a tremendous deficit, okay? So how do you resolve the deficit? Either you slash expenditures, very much in line with the supply side economic behavior. As you say, you have to eliminate the deficit, or you run a very large public debt through the issuing of treasury bills and government bonds. And I suspect that what will happen is a combination of both. A massive slashing of all categories of civilian expenditure except defense, which will lead to collapse in public services across America, mounting debts at the state and municipal levels, and then on the other hand, you're going to have a massive debt overhang. And who are the creditors of the state? Ironically, the same institutions which are recipients of the bailout are going to lend money to the government so that they can actually finance the bailout. And so we're in a circular situation where the recipients of the bailout are helping the government as creditors to finance the bailout, and essentially what this means is that the federal government is financing its own indebtedness. It's an utterly absurd relationship, and it is going to lead to eventually to the privatization of all public services and infrastructure and assets, because these financial institutions will, and their related bond rating agencies such as Moody's and Standard & Poor, what are they going to do? They're going to impose a behavior on the U.S. federal government. They're going to say, okay, you now have your public debt has gone from 11 trillion to 13 or 14 trillion. I think that the debt is going to go up dramatically overnight. It will be fed not only by the bailout, but it will also be fed by the fact that as a result of the recession, you're going to have less people paying taxes, okay, because there are going to be layoffs, so that in effect, what is happening is that the solution to this crisis, which is the bailout procedure under top, is actually the cause of further collapse, because what you're going to have is a massive crisis of the public debt.
And this weekend, sir, we see the G20 meeting in Washington, the IMF. What do you see coming out of this meeting? Do you see IMF with a much greater role in the world banking, such as, for example, the Federal Reserve does here in the United States?
Well, you see, you have to understand that the people who are meeting behind closed doors are in effect the architects of this crisis. Okay, and it's interesting to note that while Obama is not participating in the meetings, which I think is appropriate because he's only president-elect, he has nonetheless delegated a whole series of advisors, and it just so happens that the people whom he's sending to attend these meetings, such as Lawrence Summers, and not to mention there's another guy who's very important in there. It's one of the authors of the so-called Graham-Leach-Bliley Act of 1999, which deregulated the banking industry. So it's Representative Leach, Jim Leach of Iowa, who's really behind this legislation, which has led to disaster, and he is going to the G20 meeting alongside various former Clinton officials. Now, what I'm suggesting here is that, there's a bipartisan consensus. What I'm suggesting is that G20 is dominated by people who fully share the IMF World Bank consensus, the so-called Washington consensus. They are committed to deregulation. They have been building this disaster over several years, I would say over the last 20 or 30 years, since the beginning of the Reagan administration, and we cannot expect that this group of supply-side neoliberals will actually put forth a solution to the crisis. A solution to the crisis would be to question the legitimacy of the institutional speculators and the various speculative instruments, including derivative trade, options, and so on, short selling. To freeze, one would have to freeze the hedge funds, intervene politically in this whole corrupt and crony financial apparatus. But what you have is exactly the opposite. You have all these cronies are there, and they are deciding on the architecture which will best serve their interests.
French President Nicolas Sarkozy has already called for the dollar to be demoted as the world reserve currency this week before the G20 meeting. Do you think the dollar's days are numbered, and how would this affect the American economy?
Well, let me put it this way: Sarkozy is a very firm supporter of U.S. foreign policy. I'm not sure what his particular personal agenda is. The U.S. dollar at present is certainly overextended, particularly in view of this massive increase in the money supply resulting from the bailouts and so on, so that in effect there's not much clout behind the U.S. dollar, except the fact that it's supported by the dominant role of the United States worldwide, its military superiority, the fact that these financial institutions are all over the place, that they have the ability to manipulate markets, but it's not the real economy of the United States, nor